Hello everyone and welcome. Make a cup of your favorite drink and get comfortable because this is a wonderful time for news stories from YellowCat. Send your own stories in the comments below and maybe they'll be in our new video. What's your got fired but was totally worth it story? Worked at a big supermarket chain, did cashier job, placed out products, and some behind the scenes management. One day, I get called to the back. It was the regional manager, said my deficit after my shift says cashier is getting out of control, about 10 to 50 bucks every shift. Threatened me with the cops saying that the surveillance video showing me stealing the money. I said sure, get the cops here, I'll just wait. After 30 minutes, cops arrived. When we started watching the footage, there was nothing showing that I stole the money. Cops said there is no evidence against me and took off. I still got fired on the spot, and they even banned me from entering their stores all over the country. A few weeks later, I get a call from the girl that was working there with me, covering me for smoke breaks when I was cashier. Teared up, choking from crying. It was her stealing the money all the time while I used my breaks. Got charges pressed against her, did 120 hours community service, and paid a huge fine. Few days after that, I get a call from regional manager apologizing for the inconvenience and asking me if I want to return. Told him to F off and hung up. I was working in a small accounting firm making less than minimum wage, $30,000. Minimum wage in Australia is $38,000. The boss was exploiting the fact that people like me were desperate to get their foot into the door of accounting, as it is very competitive in Australia. One day, I was stupidly posting on a forum about my situation and looking for advice. The boss found out and fired me on the spot. Feeling pretty spiteful about the whole thing, I reported my situation to Fair Work Ombudsman Australia. A month later, I got payment for the amount I should have been making at minimum wage for the 6 months I was there. About a month after that, I landed a much better role at large company, making almost double what I was making previously. The icing on the cake is the firm ended up getting investigated by Fair Work, and I can only assume they received a hefty fine because they are no longer in business. Worked in a government office where it's typical to wring hands, deny responsibility, and shift the burden onto citizens even if it's the state that made the mistake. I had a county prosecutor calling repeatedly trying to obtain some documents. It was a drunk driver case. The guy was facing down some serious charges and they were trying to build their case and determine the extent of charges against him. Absolutely someone who needed to be put away. Everything in policy said they were entitled to it, but the person who normally furnishes it was constantly out with all manner of excuses. I finally got sick of putting it off, stalling them, making excuses for her. I pulled the info myself and sent it. That didn't break any laws or policy, but they decided to sack me for it because I'd overstepped. But I'd do it again. Went into a business meeting for the ice cream shop I managed, Bold Stone. I was told that the girl that was 7 months pregnant need to be written up as much as possible so they could have a legal reason to fire her. Told them it wasn't going to happen and they suggested that I put in my 2 weeks and find other work. So, I did. I was told that I was going to be gone in 2 weeks and might as well just fire her. Was no way in H I would do that. I walked into that meeting with a 50-hour-a-week decent-paying job and left with nothing but my integrity. I then proceeded to drive to my store and pull the girl aside and let her know what was going on. Last I checked, I believe she manages the store now. Was working in dialysis when another competing company came to town, effectively eliminating the monopoly my current company had on treating kidney failure. The company I worked for had already lost their physician group and was so afraid of losing staff and the patients that would follow them to the new company, they gave out huge retention bonuses. After receiving my bonus, I was fired for a manufactured problem beyond my control. I was hired by the new company, got a $10,000 signing bonus, and took a couple dozen patients with me to the new company. Got my picture in the new company's brochure they mailed out to all the dialysis patients, so they knew where I ended up. Just having a new company come to town provide competition was also amazing for the patients. They got new heated massage chairs and new TVs with more channels and better/more staff to take care of them. The old company's dialysis centers across town that did not get competing dialysis units put nearby didn't give those patients anything. I was working a full-time job and 3 part-time jobs. I worked every day, and on the weekends, I would work nights. I rarely slept, and this went on for 6 months. One of the jobs was for the well-known lotion and scent store. The pay and hours really didn't make a difference, but I enjoyed working there. My manager was going out of town and was leaving a new supervisor in charge I hadn't gotten to know all too well, and he did not like me for some reason. Well, the stars aligned and I got a weekend off except for a morning shift with them. My manager, before she left, offered me the day off, but me knowing it would leave her short-handed, I declined. She told me that if I overslept or was late, it was okay due to how much I've been working. So I go home that night and crash out hard. The feeling of my bed was the greatest thing. I set my alarms and out I went. I woke up over 30 hours later, not realizing I had slept through my shift until I saw the voicemail on my phone. The new supervisor had fired me and put me down as a no-call, no-show, which was rightfully so. I called the store and he refused to talk to me. So I called the manager and told her what happened. She said it was fine and would take care of it and to come in for my next scheduled shift. Well, long story short, this little A of a supervisor submitted my termination files to corporate and classified me as a no rehire. My manager was peed and fired him shortly afterwards. The sleep was the best I had had in years and still in my top 10 sleeps. Totally worth getting labeled as a no rehire. Delivered pizzas for a few years during college. Came in one day. Several managers were working and they were all dragging A. Turns out that the regional manager had made them all work overnight to deep clean the ovens while off the clock. The GM was a young guy that just wanted to look good for his bosses and avoid confrontation at all costs, so he didn't say anything. I brought it up and was quit or be fired immediately, so I called the owner and corporate. The RM panicked and tried to rehire me. During our conversation, I may or may not have mentioned the labor board after refusing her job offer. There was no way in H I was going back to work for a GM or RM that fired people for causing contention and a hostile work environment. For, telling them they could lose their jobs for making people work for free. Everyone got paid for that night, and I never had to work another day in that HO. I do realize that I could have had some sort of court case due to the whistleblowing laws, but I was a poor college student and couldn't afford a lawyer. I refused the job offer and technically quit. It would have probably just cost a ton of cash, and I probably wouldn't have gotten anything out. I worked at a radio station in the late 80s part-time. The way up the ladder was that you got hired part-time, then as the full-time people moved up and out, you were slotted in for promotion based on how long you'd worked there. I'd worked my way up to the top of the part-time heap. The next full-time slot that opened was mine by virtue of seniority. But the next job that opened up was the midday show. That show had always been hosted by a female, and while I was next on the list, the job was given to a woman who'd worked for the station for a grand total of 2 weeks. She was terrible. It was unfair, and I expressed this in a letter to the program director. I got fired for having an attitude. It was the best career move I ever made. I walked out of that place with my head held high and within a year was working at a much larger station on my way to a career in major markets. Last I heard, my old boss is still there in charge of that little station. I work for a small startup that does mobile neurocognitive testing and brain health solutions. It was interesting work, but the company was poorly organized and managed. Prior to me, they had one full-time junior engineer doing front-end and a half-time senior engineer doing literally everything else. The default head of engineering was the CEO, a medical doctor who knew nothing about engineering or creative work. Already a good situation, right? Prior to being hired, they explained to me that they wanted someone to come in and eventually take over the engineering team as a CTO-to-be. I thought that sounded fun, and I knew a lot of ways to improve what they had, so I took the position. Over the coming months, I had managed to implement several sweeping changes that improved organization, increased efficiency, and reduced wasted time. Engineering was running well, and the company as a whole was running better. But there's this fatal mistake that people make when it comes to engineering work. They believe, counter to all the evidence and research, that more hours equals more productivity. See, the CEO had given access to the production servers to her husband, not an employee of the company, and not a programmer. He screwed things up, and we had to work through the weekend once to fix it. It needed to be done, no argument. However, it set a dangerous precedent. Working weekends gets us done. As I was not yet the CTO, though I had been told I would be getting this soon, I did not have the authority to say no when the CEO insisted that we started crunching. I pushed my hours up to 50 and our part-time senior engineer started doing 80s. The guy was a monster. In our second week of crunch, something happened. My coworker, the one doing so much overtime, required a strict regimen of medication to deal with some health issues. In his fatigue late one night, he mixed up his medication and passed out on the keyboard. His wife found him, could not wake him up, and he ended up in emergency room. It was a pretty serious mistake, and as scary as it was to find him like that, she probably saved his life. I asked our CEO if she felt any responsibility at all for what happened. Her response, verbatim, with name changed, "No, not at all. Sean is a big boy and can take care of himself." While I don't disagree that he was a responsible individual, and we are all ultimately only responsible for ourselves, her setting arbitrary deadlines and saying the company will go under if we missed them, saying that we needed to work extra hours or we would all be out of a job, ultimately, I feel, placed some of the blame on her. Regardless, at the end of the conversation, I told her I would no longer be working overtime and I would advise my coworkers to stop as well, that we would be returning to our normal engineering processes, which had been proven to be effective and productive. I was fired the following Tuesday. Obligatory not me but a friend story. He was working downtown Indianapolis on the 30-something story of one of the tallest buildings in Indiana. He walks into his office and armed security is already there. He is getting let go. He had a small box with some personal items in it, and his plan was to go to his neighborhood pub and get S-faced. Before he did that, he stopped at a cafeteria a couple of floors away. He had worked there for 11 years and knew everyone, to say goodbye. While saying goodbye, an acquaintance from another couple of floors away saw him, saw his box of personal items, and asked what happened. He told him he was let go. He asked, "You're a programmer, aren't you?" "Absolutely," was my friend's reply. "Come with me," the acquaintance replied back. He went with him. Long story short, he was interviewed and hired 2 hours later to start on Monday. He really wanted to take some time off, but they were adamant that he start on Monday, so he did. But he still went to the pub after getting 4 months of severance pay, and he still got S-faced. Now for the best part. Monday morning, he is going to work for the new company just 4 floors away, and he gets on the elevator at the same time as his old boss. "Where the H are you going?" old boss asked. "To work," my friend replied. "The H you are? I fired you Friday, don't you get that?" "Hey," my friend replied, "I didn't say I was going to work for you, a-hole." So yeah, you 4 months of pay, you get immediately hired, you don't have to change your downtown parking situation, spend the afternoon getting S-faced at your local pub, get a sizable raise, and you get to tell off your old boss in public on Monday morning. As Ice Cube put it, gotta say it was a good day. Thank you for watching. Guys, thank you for all of the support and likes. Subscribe to the channel if you're not subscribed yet. See you next time.